Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle, and today we're going to take on an oldie but goodie. It's a Penn Senator 6.0 reel, and it's the earlier version of the reel. It has black side plates. It's not the high-speed edition that followed this one, and it's the core difference there is that the two sides do not have the bearings that the high-speed model have. But other than that, it serves the same purpose. It is a high-capacity, heavy-duty line, usually set up for trolling, usually used for something like shark or tuna, but very, very reliable. So, customers brought this in. It's pre-season up here in the Northeast. It's a good time that I encourage my customers to bring the reels in for tune-ups for the coming season. And that's just what we have here. Lessons to be learned on this one. This one is a backup reel. The customer traditionally fishes a Penn International, but always has this one in the rack as another line. And here's the lesson. You can notice that there is a lot of salt corrosion on the metal pieces and parts, and he's rarely used the reel. The lesson is, regardless of whether you're fishing that reel or just carrying that reel on the boat, after every trip, you should be hosing those reels down with fresh water and coating them with a drying agent like a WD-40. That'll keep the chrome and metal parts nice and clean and clear for future use. So I'm going to show you how to service the gear side and put a little grease on the other side. I won't take you through the reel cleanup. It'll make the video too long. But I just wanted to share this with you in case you have one of these reels or in case you're considering buying one of these reels. These reels can be found used on the market today for about $50 or $55. eBay, maybe you get a good deal. Maybe sometimes you pay a little bit higher. Generally about condition. So if this is all clean chrome without the monofilament and everything look pristine, lightly used, you're going to pay $75, $80. Retail on this one is probably was about $100 to $120. The high-speed versions now are probably in that range as well. So before I get started, I like to hit these screws on the older reels with some WD-40 around the posts, only because I've had a tendency for these to break off in the past. And I start that, the WD-40 is just a penetrating oil. I start it on the back side. And it's not going to give you a lot of help, but you know, any help that you can, right? If you can avoid the problem, better off for everybody. So, all right, we're going to just let that sit for a second. I'm going to hit the spool where that corrosion is. As I said, I'm not going to show you how to get rid of that corrosion at this point, but this will be a start. And WD-40, to the best of my knowledge, does not affect the monofilament line. So it's a good drying agent. Okay, these are flat-bladed screws for the start of it, and I start by removing the side plate. I'm using a standard 1/4-inch screwdriver. Most of the other Penn reels use a smaller screw head, but these are the bigger ones, and I just used the 1/4-inch screwdriver for that. On these, there's two different size screws, just to note right off the bat, and we'll talk about it later on reassembly. There's a cross post screw. That's the longer screw. And then there's the reel seat screw, and those are the shorter screws. When I get to pull one of those out, I'll show you. And the shorter screws fit into the mounting position. Here's an example of what happens when you don't keep your reels lubed. This post is turning, and I'm going to go grip that with a pair of pliers. I don't like to put the pliers directly onto that because it can scar it, so I'll just take a little buffer in between to hold down on that. You could use a rag, you can use steel wool, you can use other things, but that'll stop the teeth of the pliers from scarring it if you don't have it gripped tight enough. And you can see I managed to get that off without getting the pad, without getting the bar scraped. And I can tell you, you learn from experience. I've had experiences where I've scarred the bars, so lessons learned, right? Okay, we're going to work our way down. Now, all of the Penn reels basically are mechanically the same from an internal look at. As a matter of fact, if you look at the Long Beach 60, the Delmar, the old Seaboys, and every one in the Senator line from a 1.0 up to a 9.0, they're all basically the same construction. So this video will apply to basically any reel you're doing. It's just a matter of size. And on the 6.0, this is the largest of the gearing sets, but the setups internally are about the same. You'll also notice on the Senators that the high speeds have gone through a couple of iterations now of crossbar structures. They've changed over to graphite structures. There's a lot of aftermarket products available for this this reel. There's accurate sets and others that you could upgrade your reel with. You wouldn't want to do it on this one. This is the low speed, but the high speed ones, you would certainly do that. Okay, we have the plate off. And if you look inside, both sides, you're not gonna be surprised to see that this is just like a Penn Long Beach reel. Maybe the difference is that the parts are bigger, but everything else is essentially the same. So we'll start on our servicing by lubing the non-drive side, and I just use a little blue grease. In this case, it's a Penn Precision reel grease, and it just goes right into that side piece bearing. And then I'm going to just check to make sure that the back side of this is okay. Again, I'm going to take this apart later and actually clean it up, but for now I'm just going to give it a light scrub here with the steel wool, and I'm going to sit that back down into the grease on the spool carrier on the back side. That's just so I can get that out of the way. You're noticing I'm using a parts tray. This is a good time to show you that those two screws are different since they're in the parts tray. The small one goes on the reel seat. The longer one goes into the crossbars. Okay? And the reel disassembly starts with taking the handle off. That's a smaller set screw, and there's a screw hole in the handle itself. And these are beautiful handles. They're Bakelite. They're an earlier time. A lot of them are selling on eBay alone for $20 or $25 just for the handle. I use this wrench. It's a handle wrench. There's a wrench that does come with this. The 6.0 has a bigger handle nut than the 4.0s and the like. This handle wrench, I was asked on one of my previous videos, where do you get it? It's available from pennparts.com. It is an aftermarket handle, but if you are doing a lot of reel work, this one's a little bit thicker, gives you more leverage to turn the pieces and parts. So this reel is as I expected. It's got wear on the outside because it was just hanging around in a pole holder, but on the inside of it, it's clean. Some people ask me, how can I remember where the pieces and parts come from? If you're unfamiliar with the reel, if this is the first time you're doing this, take pictures along the way so that you know, for example, that this buffer washer that goes between the handle and the star drag knob is where it is. And the same thing as you get inside with the components. This one's a little bit interesting. It's got another one underneath it, and it's got a collar, and then it's got a felt drag washer, and all of the drags can actually come out of this assembly by pulling out at the top. That's one of the things that's kind of interesting about this one. You do not need to take the reel off in order to do the drag washer assembly. We're going to, I'll show you that, but for now we'll just leave it at that. Okay, so we're going to take the 4 bridge screws out. They correspond with the 4 in the back. I'm going to, that's the felt washer sleeve that just fell out there. And you'll notice I have a protective glove on. That's to keep the contaminants off my hand. And you'll notice I'm cupping the reel so that as I remove this, the screw that holds the anti-reverse dog, the spring that holds that anti-reverse dog does not fly out. and caused me a lot of aggravation trying to find it. So you'll feel as you're backing these screws off when the screw is disengaged from the bridge plate. And with this fourth one now, I should have the bridge plate start to move back, and that's exactly what it's doing now. The springs are pushing it back. And then you can push it through to remove that. And then when you flip this, remember these screws are loose, so they're going to come out. And that's what we have. We have our 4 screws. And on these screws, you'll notice that there's 2 different screws, right? There's a screw that's partially threaded. That goes to the spring assembly up top, and you have a fully threaded screw which goes to the bottom assembly. And then here's that spring I was talking about. In the older versions, it's a flat spring that keeps tension on the anti-reverse dog. And when I cup it, here's your anti-reverse dog, which is going to stop the reel from backpedaling. Again, all of these go in my parts bucket, so I know where to get them later. And we're going to go into assemble the top end of this reel and service that. So again, this looks identical to a Model 60, the only difference being that the parts are bigger and they've been engineered to heavy-duty specifications because it's going to be dealing with the big fish. These springs come out, they sit in an indentation. Normally I would put those in my parts bucket, but I'm going to just clean this one up real quick and we're going to reassemble. This is not a dirty reel. If it was a dirty reel, I would do a lot of cleaning at this point. Right now I'm just going to just do a little bit of a brush up here to show you. I use Q-tips for hard to reach places, like around that sleeve for the spool and in some of the crevices here. And I'm using a WD-40, which is just a light degreaser. It's an oil-based degreaser. And as you can see, I also use paper towels. So paper towels will go into mop up to get any surplus grease off of there. And we're in good shape to just reinstall on that. Now again, if I had the time, I would be showing you how to clean the corrosion off of this using a mild metal cleaner and steel wool. In that case, it's a metal automotive polish. But for the sake of brevity in this video, I'm just going to bypass those steps and come back to them later. So some folks asked, how do I select the reels that I work on? And the short answer is they select me. It's whatever my customers bring in. And one of them is bringing this in for the pre-season service, so I thought I would show you. I used the blue grease on the back of the sleeve for the spool. I am also going to clean this briefly. I use a little scrubby pad to get the dried grease off of this. And everything I'm seeing in this reel is exactly what he's saying. It's been working, but not too hard. It's had a good life. It's been treated fairly. And other than being washed down at the end of the trips, it's in good condition and it will last a very long time. Okay, while I have this out, I also checked the teeth on the drive gear. This one intersects with the spool, just making sure that there's no bends or broken teeth in it that would make it operate erratically. This is in good condition. So we assemble that by putting the springs back in those little indentations, pressing down to seat that on that spool carrier, taking the transition piece for the free spool assembly, snapping that back in, and then this is the way we found it earlier. And that's pretty much ready to go. Okay, now we're over to the drag service. I'm going to set that aside for a moment. The drags are heavy duty. You can tell there's extra drags in here versus the like the 60 size Long Beach. This collar fell out on the front end. That wasn't a problem. Then you have a felt washer, which typically would get oiled. Seats on top of that. And then we're into the drags themselves. So I'm going to try and pull this sleeve off, which is easily accomplished. And then I will lay out for you how the drag is worked. Now, the older ones have the thicker drags, and in this case they're going to need to be separated and lubricated, because another tip that I usually put out there is to keep these assemblies lubricated well, but when you're not using the reel, to back off the drag. And it appears that these were pressed down, because you can see these are just kind of cemented onto that main metal piece there, so that's no good in terms of drag operation. So we'll go clean them up. I use a utility knife, watching my hands, of course, and you should be able to separate them as a wedge. There you go. That's the one side, and then we'll try and get the metal piece off of this side. And you can see it's this one would be useless in terms of drags in the center. Now the bottom would probably still spin because that one came out, and the top, but you lose all that sensitivity within there. There's some additional corrosion in there. I'm going to take steel wool. I'm going to clean up that sleeve. And you can see the gears on here. They just don't make gears like this. Those gears are built for a lifetime of use. And then while I have my steel wool, there's a little bit of grease deposit there where that anti-reverse dog works. So I'm going to clean that up while I'm at it as well. And then there's a little bit of corrosion on that brass piece, so we'll get that done at the same time. Okay, so how you reassemble this. So you have, and this is standard on almost all drags, you have a drag washer, a metal washer, a drag washer, then there's an eared washer which has the two little studs on it, last drag washer, metal topping gear, and in this case, because of the way they set it up, they have a felt ring that gets oiled on top of the last one. In some of your Penn reels, you actually have a little cap washer instead, but that's okay. All right, so on this one, before I go much further, I'm going to take reel oil, and I'm going to oil the pinion shaft, just a drop or two. You don't need a lot. And then I'm going to use drag grease. I use Cal's Universal Dry Grease for this purpose. And you want to make sure on fabric drags that these get greased. And you saw what happens when they don't get greased. They stick, or if they get greased and are not serviced on a regular basis, the grease dries. It becomes like a cement, and it'll weld its way onto the metal washers. Okay, so I'm going to use a little steel wool to clean up the drags so that they turn smoothly, the metal washers on them. That one's good. I use a 4-0 steel wool. That's good for buffing and polishing without scarring or scraping. So they can be used on the outside of the reel as well as the inside of the reel. All right, that goes on. Now we're going to go put a little bit more drag grease on the next one. And this is going to optimize performance, right? So when I see this customer, when the reel is finished, I'm going to let them know that one of the things that they should be doing is to back off that drag star if they're not using it because of what I found. And then we'll also tell them about using that WD-40 after the trips, even though he hasn't used the reel, to make sure that that reel is washed down so that the salt spray here on the East Coast doesn't cause it to corrode anymore. So, okay, we'll do that one. Then we're going to butter up the last of the fabric washers here, composites, I guess. Now these things are heavy duty, right? They're almost 1/8 of an inch thick. They're built for big fish, right? That's what this reel is all about. Okay, that stack washer goes on. One more cleanup on this one. We're gonna put that one back on. Oops, clean the top on this. And top doesn't affect the drag performance, but might as well go do it. All right, that's good. And then we have that felt washer that sits up top. That felt washer gets oil. So we'll just put a drop of oil on there. Let it absorb in, and that'll be fine. Okay, that's your drag stack with your finishing washer. And now we'll reassemble. So we take the upper part that we just worked. We're going to start by pressing down on that. We're going to grab the fully threaded screw, which goes on the bottom. We're going to insert the drag stack components. We're going to partially turn this, so this is similar to most of the other Penn reels that are this kind of design. Then we're going to go grab that anti-reverse dog. And the reverse dog sits over that screw that we're holding. That screw, if you're looking at it, is at the right side of the reel. If you're on the other side of the reel, it's the left side. And then this metal flat spring sits half on that dog and then bends around the post to seat. And there you go. So it sits half on here, bends around this post, and lays up against that. And then you finish by turning the bridge plate until the bridge plate snaps in with the screw that you have. With this one, don't tighten the screw all the way down, just feel it grab, and then come on back out. And I use an X pattern here to make sure that all of the bridge screws are in before I tighten down. This one's a partially threaded one because it goes on that spring I showed you. I'm going to lock that in. Again, a couple of turns just to make sure that you know it's seated. I'm going to take the fully threaded one and go in below there. And then we have one more partially threaded screw that goes on the top. Opposite side. Now that I have the 4 in, I can tighten that one down. And again, I like to tighten on the X pattern. It's almost like an automobile lug wrench kind of a thing, where you're working it side to side to make sure that you have even torque across them. Okay, so we're good on that. And then if you remember now, we have a gear sleeve that goes on here. We have the thicker of the washers goes on. We have the star drag. Just clean that up a little bit while I'm at it. Again, I'm going to come back and clean the general corrosion off of this one, but here's a case where I don't have to take the side plate off if I do this now, so I'll go ahead and do that. Okay, and then we're going to screw that back on, and then we have the light washer, we have the handle, and the handle nut. Now I'm not going to put these two on yet. I'm going to screw this assembly back in first. There's one more piece that I lubricate on that. That's the free spool transition piece. That gets a little blue grease on it. I also like to put a little bit on the shaft of the spool before I reassemble. So we got that going. We're going to now reassemble by putting the spool shaft in and lining up the side plate holes. And remember, you got 2 different size screws here, and you know, without trying to be punny, it's easy to screw up, right? You can put a small screw in the top, large hole down on the reel seat, and then what happens is this part sticks out, and your line snags on the piece that's sticking out. Not all the time, but you know, you don't want to lose a fish because you know, you didn't realize that, oh, that's the way it went, right? So there's a method there. Okay, so, and again, this one I do just like I do with the bridge plate screws. I don't go circular. I go on a kind of an X pattern or a star pattern here. So I'll put one up top, and I won't tighten it all the way in. And I'm going to come down, grab one of the shorter screws, put that in the middle of the reel seat. So I've just kind of gone 180 degrees away from the first one. And then I'll come back and I'll go kind of like, so we've sort of been north and south, so I'll go east and west now on these crossbars. And again, they're not all fully tightened down yet. That's so that if there was a little bit of a bind in there, you want to make sure you're coming in flat on this one so that the reel